David Sanger, welcome to 7:30.
Great to be with you, Sarah.
Let's start with the news of the day. This is obviously a very tight race in the US. Tim Walz is not from a swing state, although he's swing state adjacent. He has some relatively progressive policies. How does he fortify the ticket for Kamala Harris?
Well, he's a really interesting bet for Harris. She had a choice of picking Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania and hoping that that would put Pennsylvania squarely in her on her side. She may win Pennsylvania anyway. If she doesn't, probably there will be some judgment or second guessing about whether she made the right choice. But what she did instead was pick somebody who did not come from the Eastern elite, who is a Midwestern governor, has been in the military reserves, has been a school teacher, didn't go to an Ivy League school, is very good at counterpunching against former President Trump and de Vance. He's the one who coined this phrase, or at least popularized it, that the Trump-Vance grouping is just weird, as he has said on many occasions, and that has sort of picked up. He has a very avuncular football coach kind of persona, and I think her bet here is that that outweighs either electoral advantage or even a move to the center, which she would have gotten with some of her other potential running mates who had more conservative views.
You just mentioned the fact that he used that phrase weird to describe Vance and Trump, which has obviously garnered an enormous amount of attention in the US. But how important actually for him being selected was that success in dominating the news media and actually pushing Trump out of the way over the last couple of weeks?
Well, a lot of things pushed Trump out of the way, and I think it explains in part at least why you saw former President Trump go off on that strange tangent when talking to a convention of black journalists last week about whether or not Kamala Harris had just recently discovered that she was black or said that she was black. It's very similar in some ways to what he did when he was questioning the birth certificate of former President Barack Obama during earlier runs. So I think it's clear that former President Trump is rattled here and probably rattled by these polls. But the polls are so close right now that they're within the margin of error. You couldn't say anything other than the fact that Harris seems to have some decent momentum.
Now, we are clearly in just moving on to international affairs, but actually how they relate to the campaign. We're clearly in a very dangerous moment between Israel and Iran. Just the first question, what impact would any escalation have on the campaign, first of all?
I think that the Mideast issue is going to be a very sensitive one for Vice President Harris, because she has, on the one hand, supported the administration's position, but on the other hand, put a very different emphasis on it when she said the other day that she would not be silent about the suffering of the Palestinian people, and put that ahead of what she was saying about Israel. And I think that she recognizes that President Biden got himself into really a pretty bad place, which is to say that the pro-Israel lobby believed that he was sympathizing too much with the Palestinians and putting too much pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, to let up on attacks on civilians in Gaza. And the progressive side of the party thought that President Biden and, by extension, Vice President Harris were wrongly providing the arms to Israel to carry out those attacks.
Now, reporting today sees the White House claiming that intense diplomacy by the Biden administration may have staved off the prospect of a catastrophic war between Iran and Israel. I know that you've been travelling, you're in Australia, but how do you respond to that?
So I've been talking to administration officials and military officials. It's interesting. They thought the attack by Iran against Israel in retaliation for the killing of a Hamas leader on Iranian territory would have happened by now. And they've been using their contacts through the Swiss embassy in Tehran, through the Iranian mission to the United Nations, to make the case to Iran that it would be a big mistake to escalate and to retaliate. We don't know whether they have forestalled an attack, whether the Iranians might diminish their attack, whether or not the Israelis will respond or not. But certainly President Biden was able to engineer a de-escalation in April, and he's trying to repeat that today.
Now, since Donald Trump re-emerged as the dominant figure in the Republican Party, Australian journalists have got used to very reassuring noises about the continuity of AUKUS, somewhat platitudinous noises, really. The question is, does anybody really know what Trump thinks about AUKUS?
No, we don't. And, I could imagine, since everything's a transactional bargain with him, he may think that the price we're charging isn't high enough. But, Sarah, I've made the point that it's possible Australia is focused on the wrong problem with the submarine deal. Everybody seems fixated here on the question of, will you get these older generation subs? My bigger concern is that when you look out over the Pentagon's plans for the next 5 or 10 years, it's about the transition to unmanned, autonomous submarines, the kind that you could put, say, sitting on the bed of the Taiwan Strait that could pop up during a confrontation for either surveillance or for attack. And that by the time AUKUS got fully unfolded in the 2030s, the equipment that you have negotiated for may look wildly vulnerable because AI is going to help track submarines, and may look wildly out of date. And that maybe this agreement should focus more, as some of the research elements of it do, on swarms of unmanned surveillance and attack submarines, rather than a small handful of increasingly vulnerable older style subs.
Is that what people in the Pentagon have actually said to you?
What they have said to me is that their focus intently for the next 5 or 10 years, both for airborne drones and undersea drones, is to develop a fleet. In fact, the name for this program inside the Pentagon is the Replicator Program, that would very rapidly turn out low-cost surveillance and attack kind of equipment that would be unmanned. And I'm not sure that you want to be in a situation by the late 2030s where you're seeing Australia begin to deploy a much older but manned technology at a point the U.S. and maybe some other allies and maybe some adversaries are moving in a very different direction.
Does that mean that there are elements of the Pentagon that regard AUKUS as a bit off-Broadway?
Certainly, I think they view it a little bit as a sideshow to the main things they're doing. I think, Americans view the AUKUS agreement not as primarily about the submarines themselves, but about locking in what's a very strong intelligence and other relationship between Australia and the United States. I'm not sure that these are necessarily the weapons that we'll be thinking of as the primary tools for a late 2030s competition with China.
That will not be welcome news to some elements of the defence establishment in Australia. David Sanger, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you very much.